North.
Thank you most kindly, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to participate in this debate on the Appropriation Bill 2024. Madam Speaker, as I begin, I want to applaud the contribution made by the distinguished leader of the opposition, the Honourable Member for Siparia, on presenting a very detailed, articulate, and comprehensive budget response. In her response, Madam Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition highlighted the pain of our citizens and the pain that citizens are experiencing in every sector across this country. Whether it is the pain from the escalating crime situation plaguing our society, whether it is the pain from the poor supply of water affecting almost every community in the country, whether it is the pain of poor infrastructure, of bad roads, or poorly maintained drains and rivers, resulting in several homes and gardens being flooded out, whether it is the pain they are experiencing in their pockets due to the increasing cost of food and living expenses, the pain of not knowing where their next meal is coming from. Madam Speaker, our citizens are in pain. They are hurting. And this budget presented by the Honourable Minister of Finance fails on every front to address the pain that our citizens are facing. It is a testimony that this government remains clueless, with no plans and no consideration for the well-being of the citizens of this country. Madam Speaker, before I get into my substantive contribution, I also would like to take this opportunity to thank my political leader for having the confidence in me to afford me the opportunity to shadow a very important ministry, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. Madam Speaker, I also want to take the opportunity to thank the constituents of Couva North for giving me this opportunity to represent the issues affecting the various communities across the constituency. I also take this opportunity to congratulate all my colleagues on this side who have already contributed towards this debate and bringing some clarity to a budget that really lacked the touch and the pulse of the constituents and really was not in touch with the issues affecting the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, as we examine the 2024 budget presented by the Honourable Minister of Finance, along with the supporting documents, we see once again repeated broken promises which never materialized. Promises that never materialized. This is what it represented, and this is what they stand for. Broken promises year after year after year. Madam Speaker, as we take a closer look at the budgetary allocation for the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, along with the history of these allocations, we see how little this government really cares for the agriculture and for the fisheries sector. Madam Speaker, it was really sad and disappointing to listen to the Minister of Finance boast about actively seeking to expand agricultural production. That's the words of the minister. Actively seeking to expand agricultural production, when the actions of this government have been the total opposite. On October the 5th, 2015, the Minister of Finance, upon delivering his first budget presentation, stated, and I quote, "We must do all that we can to expand agricultural production to reduce our reliance on imported food products," end quote. However, last Monday, the 2nd of October this year, 2023, the Minister of Finance, upon delivering this year's budget, stated, and I quote, "Madam Speaker, the agriculture sector has been on a decline, recording a low level of less than 2% of gross domestic product over the last 5 years," end quote. When we look at the results of how the government has been reducing our reliance on imported food products, as stated by the Minister of Finance 8 years ago, the minister shed light in his presentation last Monday when he said, and I quote once more, "Regrettably, food imports per annum have been escalating, reaching over 5 billion in 2019 to 2021, with 7.3 billion in 2022." End quote. So 8 years ago in 2015, the Minister of Finance asked in his first budget presentation if the country was benefiting from an agricultural sector geared towards achieving food security. Madam Speaker, 8 years later, we are facing a food security crisis with declining food production and a significantly increasing food import bill, now at an all-time high of $7.3 billion. Madam Speaker, this Minister of Finance on Monday in his presentation inserted that the government is actively seeking to expand agriculture. This is quite ironic because as we look at our different crop production levels, it seems as though it is the opposite of what he said he was trying to do. And the information is there. The data is in the documents that we receive. The review of the economy, Table 6, domestic production of agricultural products per 1,000 kilogram. And if we look at the production of root crop in 2020, we had 11,053,000 kilograms. However, when we look at the figures of 2022, that fell to 5,844,000 kilograms, Madam Speaker, a decline of 47%. When we look at copra, 2020 and 2022 figures were similar. But if we just go 1 year back to 2019, we see that copra production in this country from 103,000 kilograms falling to 56,000 kilograms, a decline of 44% over that 4-year period. Rice production, when we look at the 2022 production of rice, 734,000 kilograms in 2020, but then in 2022, rice production has fallen to 125,000 kilograms. And if we just go back a few years earlier to 2017, rice production was actually at 1,619,000. 2022, fallen to 125. Madam Speaker, that is a 92% decline in the production of rice here in Trinidad and Tobago. Vegetables production in 2020, vegetables, Madam Speaker, was at 30,257,000 kilograms. In 2022, vegetables fell to 20,720,000, a decline of 13%. And I can go on and on, Madam Speaker. This is the review of the economy presented by this Minister of Agriculture, this Minister of Finance. So while this uninformed, unaware, and right out clueless minister that the way to reduce food import bill is to tax everything, tax food items, tax fruits that are recommended for healthier lifestyle, this minister brought additional taxes on fruits that are recommended by Dr. Bodo and Dr. Ragbir, the MP for Faizabad and other doctors. They're recommended for healthier lifestyle. I want to call upon the minister to tax his little brain just a little bit and review the figures presented in the review of the economy. Upon doing so, Madam Speaker, the Honorable Minister will recognize that the solution lies not in taxing, but in solving the issues affecting the farming community and boosting cultivation of primary production. Madam Speaker, as we examine the figures for agriculture in the draft estimates, detail of estimates of recurring expenditure for fiscal 2024, we see, Madam Speaker, that there has been a $108 million increase in the allocation between last year and this year. Sounds good, something to celebrate. However, Madam Speaker, when we look to see where this $108 million increase was actually allocated, what we see, Madam Speaker, is that $85 million have already been assigned to pay loans via transfer to state enterprises. So out of that $108 million increase, $85 million already gone towards paying loans. As we examine the allocation of last fiscal term, we see the Minister of Finance announce that the allocation of the development program under the Ministry of Agriculture was going to be for last fiscal term a whooping $110 million. Madam Speaker, that reminded me of when the previous People's Partnership Administration was in government, when the Minister of Food Production had spent, not allocated, but spent $139 million towards development projects to uplift agriculture here in Trinidad and Tobago. That was so, Madam Speaker, because that was the kind of investment you would expect from a government that truly cared about agriculture and the food bill of this country, because the country was being run by the progressive and dynamic leadership, the most compassionate, performance-driven, result-oriented, and the best Prime Minister this country has ever had, the member for Siparia, the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisesa. However, Madam Speaker, when we look at the revised estimate for fiscal 2023, we see that the sum of $110 million was reduced to a measly $18 million. They reduced the development program by $92 million. That's 84% of the original allocation, and yet they don't understand why the agriculture sector has been declining. It is because they are the ones who are systematically destroying the entire industry and discouraging any new interest or investment. Last month, I raised in a Sunday morning press briefing that the Ministry of Agriculture were owing farmers over $7 million in subsidy for this last fiscal term. I understand after that, they went and paid a $4 million release to farmers, but they are still owing farmers over $3 million in subsidy for last fiscal term. Madam Speaker, I will say a little more on that as I go down into my presentation. But as we take a closer look at this $18 million that we felt as though something was happening, we see acquiring land for non-agricultural purposes, which did not have an allocation for the fiscal term, received a revised estimate of $8,135,000. That was acquiring land for non-agricultural purposes. So what that means, Madam Speaker, is that the actual allocation for projects meant to develop agriculture for fiscal 2023 from $110 million, it was only $10 million utilized. Very sad and disappointing, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I move on to agricultural access roads. Agricultural access roads have been the lifelines of our farming communities, connecting gardens to market and facilitating the transportation of input factors, goods, and produce. Unfortunately, over the past 8 years, under this uncaring government, these roads have suffered from a lack of maintenance, upkeep, and investment, becoming destroyed by machinery, rain, flood, erosion, landslide, or overgrown by bushes, making it increasingly difficult for farmers to access their gardens and to transport their produce. As a result, Madam Speaker, we have seen farmers abandoning their gardens and exiting the agriculture sector. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance came into this House last Monday claiming that 240 kilometers of agricultural access roads were going to be rehabilitated in the upcoming year. Development Project 09003001J001, provision of agricultural access roads to targeted commodities and strategic crops, was allocated $10 million for fiscal 2023. However, Madam Speaker, only $270,000 was utilized to rehabilitate, and listen to this one, to rehabilitate only 1.8 kilometers. Very sad, Madam Speaker. That is the PNM style of performance. Madam Speaker, in the constituency of Couva North, there are agricultural access roads in Felicity, Chananagore, Korea, Waterloo, Brickfield, Orange Valley, Union, and Exchange Village. I want to ask the Minister of Agriculture, or even the minister in the ministry, why weren't any of these roads maintained or rehabilitated, taking into consideration that the ministry had $10 million just sitting there? And if it was another case of geographic discrimination, which our local government councillors continue to face from this PNM government, then why wasn't it utilized?
48.6, please.
I'll give a little leeway.
Thank you most kindly, Madam Speaker. And I ask the question, why wasn't this sum of money utilized to repair agricultural access roads in other constituencies? We have farmers across the entire country who are crying out for their agricultural access roads to be rehabilitated. Madam Speaker, I had written to the Honorable Minister of Agriculture on access roads in the constituency of Couva North. I completed site visits with the minister in the Ministry of Agriculture, highlighting to him the poor, dilapidated condition of these agricultural access roads, Madam Speaker. Today, I want to ask the minister, what has really been preventing him or his ministry from providing proper agricultural access roads to these farmland in Couva North constituency? On that site visit, Madam Speaker, we identified issues with the Randy Carter Bridge, which eventually collapsed into the Caparo River. This bridge provided access to farmers to access their agricultural plots. Earlier in this year, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, he gave the undertaking that this bridge was scheduled to be reconstructed. However, to date, our farmers continue to feel the pain of not having access to the agricultural plots, and the bridge remains absent. And I am once again calling upon the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to seriously look into the reconstruction of this Randy Carter Bridge to assist the farming community. Madam Speaker, when the Minister of Finance stated in his 2023 budget presentation that we are strengthening the pre-deal larceny squad to reduce pre-deal larceny in all farming districts, that was nothing but lip service, and the minister must be exposed for coming year after year after year, pretending that resources will be given to deal with the problems of pre-deal larceny. This is an issue which has been allowed to get out of hand, out of control, to the extent where just a stone throw away, right behind the Ministry of Agriculture office in Sugrim Trace, farmers were beaten and robbed of their equipment, produce, and vehicles. Madam Speaker, you see the Minister of Finance, after making his bold, hypocritical pronouncement on Monday, has in fact cut the project for the pre-deal larceny squad from $9,054,000 last year down to $3 million this year. In fact, Madam Speaker, how they treated this development project exposes the minister and their promises never materialized government for the incompetent track record in dealing with pre-deal larceny. Out of that $9,054,000 allocated, Madam Speaker, in the revised estimate, not 1 cent was spent after numerous promises to have vehicles. They promised since the beginning of this year that they were procuring vehicles. They were going to upgrade the building and the facilities. Not 1 cent in that development program in the revised estimates. Madam Speaker, let's delve into the difference between the UNC proactive and farmer-centered approach to dealing with pre-deal larceny and the lazy PNM don't care response. I make reference to a newspaper article entitled, a Guardian newspaper article entitled Pre-deal Larceny, Lack Manpower and Resources by Shaliza Hassan Ali, dated the 21st of the 5th, 2023. And the article states, 7 years after a performance assessment on pre-deal larceny squad recommended expansion to the unit to enhance food security and sustainability in Trinidad and Tobago, there is still a lack of officers and resources. This has left the farmers at the mercy of criminals. Madam Speaker, the performance assessment report was drafted by the Office of Law Enforcement Policy. It outlined 44 recommendations for the pre-deal larceny, but senior officials, when contacted by the Guardian newspaper, were unable to say if any of those recommendations were implemented up to 7 years later. The article continued. In March 2013, Cabinet agreed to the establishment of the pre-deal larceny squad to operate in the Eastern, Northern, Central, and Southern Division. To date, officers operate from only 2 stations, Northeast and South Central. And Madam Speaker, that seems to be the only combined effort the Minister of Agriculture appeared to be speaking about when he said in his last budget presentation in the other place, and I quote, and I also want to say, this is the Minister of Agriculture in the other place, quoting, and I also want to stay.
If you're quoting from Hansard, you need to give the reference, please.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is from the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries in his contribution in the other place at last budget debate. All right. So I'm guided accordingly, Madam Speaker, and I will oblige and move on. Madam Speaker, the report that I was making reference to in 2013 highlighted that the pre-deal larceny squad had a complement of 84 constables, 14 corporals, 5 sergeants, 2 inspectors, 1 ASP, 1 superintendent, a civilian coordinator, and 8 clerical staff when it began operation. That was a total of 116 personnel. That figure has dwindled to 28 constables, 3 corporal, 2 sergeant, 1 ASP, and 1 superintendent by May this year, with no civilian coordinator or inspector, while the clerical staff was reduced to 1. That is now a total of 36 personnel, from 116 to 36 personnel. So, Madam Speaker, from 2013 to 2014, the pre-deal larceny unit, which utilized the 12 vehicles, at present, the officers utilize only 2 vehicles to conduct patrol and respond to reports after being immobile for almost 2 years. Some of the recommendations with the Office of Law Enforcement Policy identified were as follows. The recruitment of additional officers in an effort to bring the squad to its sanction strength. The establishment of an annual performance measurement system. The implementation of a robust fleet management system. And of course, Madam Speaker, that was based on the fleet that they had back then. Now it becomes irrelevant with only 2 vehicles. And the list of recommendations continue. However, Madam Speaker, it was reported in May this year that when the Guardian newspaper reached out to senior officers of the pre-deal larceny squad, they couldn't say if any of the recommendations were implemented. Does that sound like a government who is serious about agriculture or solving the pre-dear larceny pains farmers have been feeling? I don't think so, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, every year since this administration came into office, farmers have been pleading for the support of government to clean and to desilt rivers all the way to the sea. As soon as the rain falls, whether it is in the rainy season or even in the dry season, water backs up and gardens are flooded out, with crops being left to rot. The tributaries leading to the rivers between the agricultural plots are also not being cleaned. Madam Speaker, for the past 3 years, I have been making representation on behalf of the farmers, pleading with this government to clean and maintain watercourses all the way to the sea. Farmers have been crying out for help. However, these cries seem to be falling on deaf ear, Madam Speaker. The leader of the opposition, during her budget response, highlighted the inadequate compensation for natural disasters. In November 2022, unprecedented flooding affected farmers significantly due to the government failure to manage waterways properly. Despite this, almost a year later, the government has not compensated these farmers, discouraging potential entrants into farming. Madam Speaker, these farmers applied for compensation from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to assist them in getting back on their feet. However, listen to what these farmers received from the ministry. I have in my hand here, Madam Speaker, several letters which farmers received from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. And I just want to read to you some of the responses. 21st of the 4th, 2023. Dear Sir, Madam, this is to inform you that your flood application number 2 acres vegetable, hot pepper, cucumber, okra has been disapproved for the reason as stated hereunder. 1, you are not registered on the plot. 2, your application therefore does not qualify. Another letter, dear Sir, Madam, this is to inform you that your flood application dated 28th of the 11th, 2022 for 1 1/4 acres vegetables and root crop, hot peppers and edos has been disapproved for reason as follow. No sign of flood damage by the inspecting officer. Another document, another response from the ministry. This is to inform you that your flood application for 1 1/2 acres cucumber situated at Jenningham Junction, Cunupia, has been disapproved for the reason as stated hereunder. No sign of flood damage seen by the investigating officer. Your application therefore do not qualify. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this was 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months, 4 months after the flood receded. We have pictures, which I will not be able to display here at this time, but I will put it up on my page. We have pictures of the damages that these farmers incurred, and this is the kind of callous and insensitive and uncaring response that farmers are meted out when their fields are flooded out. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is really sad that this is how government continue to neglect our farmers. They are not providing them with any kind of support, and they are frustrating them out of the industry. Madam Speaker, I want to move to the giant African snail, another threat to the agriculture sector here in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we say that the giant African snail is moving faster than this PNM government, it is no laughing matter. After the Minister of Finance boasted last year of a $3 million allocation set aside to deal with the eradication of the giant African snail, and a 5-kilogram bounty program was launched by the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, these ministers take our farmers in Trinidad and Tobago here to be for a complete joke. The Ministry $5 per kilogram bounty initiative clearly was the only idea this government could have come up with to combat eradicating this pest. And the participation level, laughable to see at least. Out of a grand $3 million allocated, only a measly $27,262 was paid out. This is a testament to the low participation in this program. The numbers speak for itself. Mr. Deputy Speaker, farmers have rejected this program and call for subsidized costs for chemicals. The challenge for snail collection for our farmers, especially those operating on vast acreages, is monumental. Expecting farmers to manually collect these pests from vast fields is not only unrealistic, but also shows a complete lack of understanding of the practicalities of farming by this government. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to ask Minister Singh, Minister in the Ministry, where is the snail bait you had promised since last year, September? Why has the government not provided chemicals at a subsidized cost for farmers? I recall my colleagues, MP for Sharonas East, MP for Oropouche West, had highlighted these chemicals and these pesticides that were needed. Up to now, no support for our farming community. The giant African snail continue to run faster than this government, covering all of Trinidad and Tobago, and there's no relief for our farmers. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to move on to another very important issue in the agriculture sector troubling many farmers, and that is land tenure. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the failure of this government to address the issue of land tenure affecting the farmers of Trinidad and Tobago has had a detrimental effect on the agriculture sector. If the government is genuinely committed to bolstering agriculture, why is there no sense or no serious effort to provide farmers with land tenure? I recall a few occasions where farmers were being advantaged, their rights were being trampled upon, and I had to get involved. Just last year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I had to call on the government to cease and desist the willful destruction of agricultural crops. This was highlighted in the media. This was in Vega de Oropouche, where farmer Mark Williams and his family, their crops were destroyed by the LSA. And this family, for generations, have been cultivating on that parcel of land. The project was eventually halted. The project was eventually stopped. Another similar situation occurred in the constituency of Couva North, where crops of the Felicity farmers were also bulldozed to create another land settlement project on premium agricultural land to be converted to housing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, land tenure provides that security for our farmers, for them to make long-term investment into the agriculture sector and provide sustainable contribution to our nation's food security. There are farmers whose family have been cultivating agricultural lands for generations, yet they cannot be regularized by this government. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I call on this government to provide the necessary legal documentation to provide our farmers with the land tenure that they deserve. I want to tell this government that they are already in the waving gallery. They are already on the way out. And if they don't get it done, don't worry, very soon, the next government, a UNC government, will get it done and provide our farmers with the necessary land tenure they deserve. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I'm on this topic, I want to ask the Minister of Agriculture, what is the delay in providing the former Caroni workers with the outstanding parcels of land they have been waiting on? Mr. Deputy Speaker, we must remind this country that it is the PNM government who shut down Caroni 1975 Limited and who were required to distribute lands to former Caroni workers. However, we know this is something the PNM cannot be depended upon to execute. It was only 7 years after the closure of Caroni 1975 Limited, when the People's Partnership came into office, it was only then the former Caroni 1975 Limited workers were able to receive their plots. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the information provided is that 3,062 leases to 2 acres agricultural plots and 3,097 deeds of residential lots were executed. But there is still a lot that is outstanding. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am once again taking this opportunity to call upon the Honorable Minister of Agriculture to provide the former Caroni workers with their lease and their deeds. And again, Minister, if you cannot get it done, then step aside and let someone else get the job done. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I turn now to the St. Augustine nurseries. When the Minister of Finance stated in his budget presentation, and I quote, "We are developing and providing facilities at the St. Augustine nurseries." I want to ask if this is the same St. Augustine nurseries in which the government was seeking to build housing units. We must remember that it is the same government which identified this site for a proposed HDC development. So I wanted to ask if the minister was still referring to the Ministry of Agriculture, or was he speaking of providing facilities under the Ministry of Housing? Because you see, Mr. Speaker, this government has treated the St. Augustine nurseries with scant courtesy, not recognizing and appreciating the importance and value of the St. Augustine nurseries to the agriculture sector, and not recognizing the premium arable lands that make up the St. Augustine nursery. So when the Minister of Finance speaks about development of the St. Augustine nurseries, the actions of this government prove to be nothing less than old talk. I say so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because in fiscal 2023, the St. Augustine nurseries were allocated $2.5 million for development of provision of facilities. However, the revised estimate of 2023 showed that this project did not receive a single cent. From 2.5 million, the revised estimate shows not 1 cent. This wasn't the first time that the St. Augustine nurseries have faced this level of contempt by this PNM government, as it was only recently the government identified this site for a proposed HDC development, which also had the potential of voter padding. But I will let my other colleagues coming up deal with that matter of that housing project and the potential of voter padding, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to move on swiftly to the fisheries sector. I once again stand in this August House to represent the fisher folks here in Trinidad and Tobago, with a ministry, and not one, but 2 ministers, who have both neglected our fisher folks' need as it continues to be an afterthought by this government. New year, new budget, same struggle. Listen to these headlines, Mr. Deputy Speaker. 1. Search on for 4 fishermen, both found, Express, February 5th, 2023. Toko families get proof of life of missing fishermen, Newsday, September 10th, 2023. Gunmen attacked 6 fishermen at sea, Guardian, June 2nd, 2023. Mr. Deputy Speaker, while 7 of the Coast Guard vessels are docked away, our fisher folk continue to be vulnerable and open to attacks from the criminal entities. Last year, it was the murder of Mr. Lennox Jofield at sea. May his soul rest in peace, and condolences to his family. The year before, were Narendra Garib and Parasram Bodu, two sons of the soil of Couva North. May their soul rest in peace, and condolences to their family. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in meeting with the Minister of National Security and his team, the Cali Bay Fishing Association and the Claxton Bay Fishing Association and myself proposed a number of recommendations which more than 2 years later we are still awaiting on implementation, while our fisherfolk continue to be attacked and murdered at sea. Allow me to reiterate the recommendations we made. 1, the establishment of a Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard base in central Trinidad and on the north, south, east, and west coast of Trinidad to decrease the response time to emergencies and to increase the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard presence. The Fisheries Division had indicated their willingness to partner with national security to identify spaces at the various fish landing sites. 2, construction of a security booth at Cali Bay Fishing Facility. 3, installation of CCTV cameras at the Cali Bay Fishing Facility. 4, coordinating with the Ministry of Public Utilities to improve lighting at the Cali Bay Fishing Facilities. 5, emergency repair of Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard interceptors that can operate in the shallow Gulf of Paria. And this was promised by the former Minister of National Security since November 2018. 6, the Ministry of National Security to partner with various registered fishing associations to provide GPS trackers for vessels and engine. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the list goes on and on. New year, new budget, same struggle. After yet another year, the Cali Bay Fishing Facility remains in the same state with no enhancement to its light or jetty, no improvement to the lighting, no security guard booth, no Coast Guard presence. Despite the numerous requests to the Minister, there is still no installation of CCTV cameras. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to once again call out the deception and trickery that this budget contains. In this case, to the fishing community, and how this government attempts to hoodwink citizens year after year after year. I refer to the fact that this government allocating a whooping $10 million in 2023 to the development project, upgrade, and construction of fishing facilities. However, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as has been the case with this incompetent government, for the majority of development projects, not a cent was spent on this project also. Not 1 cent towards upgrading or constructing any fishing facility, while fishermen continue to be neglected and abandoned by this government. And this abandonment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is not only at the local level, but also at the international level. They have abandoned our fisherfolk. And I make reference, why I say that? I make reference to the European Union. The European Union, which is one of the largest trading partners in Trinidad and Tobago, and really any nation could have. The EU comprises 27 nations with over 400 million citizens who imported a significant quantity of products from Trinidad and Tobago in 2022. So imagine the shock when only last week we got news that the European Union has now issued a red card against this country for the importation of fish, preventing Trinidad and Tobago's fisherfolks from accessing the EU market due to the failure of this government once more, the non-compliance to the EU regulations. It should be noted, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the EU warned this government about this non-compliance since 2016, 7 years ago. And despite this, the government has failed to put forward the necessary legislative framework or regulatory mandates that might have allowed us to be compliant with the EU regulations. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to move across swiftly to the dairy industry, the dairy sector in agriculture. Local dairy production in 2017 stood at 2,482,400 liters. And in 2022, that production level has drastically dropped to 1,394,200 liters. This represents a 45% decline in the production of fresh cow's milk in 5 years. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if this government remains in office, we may not have any fresh milk in this country in 5 years' time with their track record. Thus far for this year.
Your initial speaking time has elapsed. You have an additional 10 minutes. Care to avail yourself?
Thank you most kindly, Mr.
Proceed.
Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, with respect to the dairy industry, based on production levels which have been calculated for this year, we expect a further 10 to 15% decline. Does this sound like a government who is actively seeking to expand agriculture? We have seen the local dairy sector in a steady decline owing to the deliberate disregard by the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries towards this sector. The artificial breeding unit is operating in an environment which is not in tandem with the needs of the sector. There are no checks and balances, no quality control, no quality assurance in the artificial insemination unit, and insemination technicians remain unable to respond to calls in a timely manner. Aside from this, farmers do not have access to technical guidance and support. These two factors alone are enough to severely affect the development of the milk production in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Mojaloo farm has not been a source of valuable forage, which is a critical component in animal husbandry. Severe understaffing and frequent equipment breakdown have been allowed to continually plague this entity for years, and now we are seeing the unfortunate results. Predial larceny of dairy cows have been on an exponential increase and have crippled numerous productive dairy farms. This issue has been left to become so bad that more and more farmers are exiting the industry as we see the production continue to decline. Turning to the Forestry Division, where they were allocated $11.3 million for 9 projects for fiscal 2023. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we look at what went on at the end of the year, that figure was revised to 840,000. That sector could not even get 1 million, from 11.3 revised to 840,000. And let us look at some of the projects that the Forestry Division supposed to develop during the year. 1, improvement of forest fire protection capability. Of course, this project is aimed at improving the Forestry Division response and protection of our forests from fire. It was allocated $2.4 million, but again, normal P&M style, revised down to 0. Mr. Deputy Speaker, similarly, forest access roads allocated $1 million, again, not 1 cent release. When we look at the farm to table project and the development project, let us look at this initiative, another project that has been consistently highlighted in the development program. Allocated $1 million is set aside for this initiative. However, it is deeply concerning to note that not a single cent was allocated in the revised estimates, farm to table. Another project suffering, farm to agro-processing, again, neglected and put aside in the priorities of spending by this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the remaining time that I have, I want to use this opportunity to turn to highlight some of the issues affecting the constituents of Couva North. And I want to plead with the honorable ministers to hear our cry and try your best to assist our constituents. I am calling on the Minister of Works and Transport, Senator the Honorable Rohan Sinanan, in this financial year to focus on some of the following roads in Couva North. Roads such as the Perseverance Road, the Waterloo Road, Orangefield Road, Calibre Road, Exchange Road, Southern Main Road from St. Mary's to Couva, the old Southern Main Road. These roads are in a deplorable state, and Minister, we are pleading with you to assist our motorists, to assist the constituents in having these roads repaired. I want to ask the Minister also, who is responsible for the Secondary Road Rehabilitation Company, to look at other areas and to coordinate with the Honorable Minister of Local Government and Rural Development and assist us with the repair of Ghani Street, Joyce Road, Rupsing Road, Korea Village, Ramsaran Street, Data Drive, which is a monumental site. This is the road leading to a monumental site. That location, Cassava Street, Wayabe Road, Sampson Street, Brickfield Village, Ojamaraj Avenue, Mahaika Road, Perry Lane, and the roads inside Roystonia and Couva North Phase 1, 2, and 3. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I ask both Minister of Local Government and Minister of Works and Transport to kindly use your gracious office to assist the constituents of Couva North. As we turn to the schools in the constituency of Couva North, I plead on behalf of the constituents and those associated with the schools to the Honorable Minister of Education to help us in the constituency of Couva North. With respect to the Karapichaima West Secondary School, this institution is in dire need of infrastructural improvement. The school requires a drainage system to prevent flash flooding during rainfall and filling of the low areas to avoid water pooling, especially from the security booth to the prefab area. Moving on to the Holy Faith Convent, we ask that something be done to assist with the traffic issue and the traffic congestion, especially along the Couva Main Road. We ask if the minister can consider assigning traffic wardens to assist those at the Holy Faith Convent. The institution has also expressed the need for 2 additional buildings to accommodate the growing number of students and enhance the learning environment. Moving on to the Waterloo High School, another significant institution built by the Honorable Member for Siparia in the Couva North constituency. This institution faces a similar traffic congestion and are asking for wardens to assist with the flow of traffic in front of the schools, and also the school entrance gate is in a state of disrepair and needs reconstruction. Moreover, as we are facing the heat, the AC units within the school premises are outdated and require replacing. And lastly, the Orange Valley Government Primary is grappling with a sewer problem. The regional corporation, the councillor Alan Taxi C. Prasad, and Councillor Dubraj Prasad, along with the chairman, former chairman Henry Awang and now Chairman Ryan Ramprasad, have been assisting the school, Mr. Deputy Chair, in having the cesspit and the sewer clean, but it needs to be addressed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to move across to drainage, and there are several drains in the constituency of Couva North that require upgrade, cleaning, box drain. And I will provide the honourable ministers with a list of this as we go forward. Similarly, the recreation grounds in the constituency, Sugarcane Avenue Recreation Ground, Agostini Settlement Recreation Ground, Chananago Recreation Ground, Rupsing Road Recreation Ground. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Karapichaima Recreation Ground, Union Village Recreation Ground, Jerry Junction Recreation Ground, and the Couva Recreation Ground. Mr. Deputy Speaker, some of these require pavilion, they require jogging tracks. I had asked the questions concerning lighting of these recreation grounds, and I am hoping that these questions and the letters that I have sent to the various ministers is treated in this financial term. One issue I want to plead with the Minister of Education is for the opening of the Waterloo ECC Center. This was 100% completed, and once again, I am pleading with the Honourable Minister to assist us. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in winding up my contribution and wrapping up, I borrow the words from the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, that there is no prosperity without food security. Our nation is facing a food security crisis. We have seen the contribution of agriculture to GDP in this country significantly declining under this PNM administration. We have seen our food import bill consistently rising. We recognize that this government has a problem with implementing and executing projects where they come to this parliament throwing out big money, and at the end of the day, when we ask for the transparency and the accountability, we expose their incompetence and we recognize that they did absolutely nothing during the entire year. And that is why I say it is time they call the election now. This government has to go. Thank you.